This is the Dallas Morning News.
This episode is brought to you in partnership by Clay Cooley Automotive, family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years. Clay, thank you for all you're doing to make intersections possible.
An entrepreneur running for a statewide office, ag commissioner. The part of the conversation I thought was fascinating, Kyle, was talking about agriculture policy. That's not in the forefront of a lot of people's mind, but when you get into it, it's got international implications, major economic ones, and health ones that I'm not sure are being addressed today.
Yeah, ranching, farming, going into water, going into a lot of different topics to your point around agriculture. I think he's a honey guy. I mean, he built a honey business, one of the largest in the world. And I hope he's trying to take a fresh perspective to, the statewide race that he's running. But he's also grounded and has a lot of humility from a faith perspective that I thought was a neat part of this conversation as well.
Good conversation.
Yeah, tune in. Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, introduce us today.
Terrific. Nate Sheets is a candidate for the ag commissioner in the state of Texas. Interesting background, though. Goes back to being an entrepreneur, the number one honey brand in the nation, was in advertising, has some very interesting perspectives on agriculture and that we're going to get into. And as I said, strong entrepreneur, strong man of faith, and then he lost his sanity when he decided to run statewide office. But
what are you thinking?
We'll judge that anyway. Nate, let's start out, though, because a lot of our listeners and most people in Texas is actually the most metropolitan state in the nation. People don't understand that. Live in large cities and that. Why should they be concerned about ag policy and even a thing called an ag commissioner? Why is this a valuable listen to them?
Yeah, as I've traveled around the state, first of all, thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here with you today. But as we've traveled around the state, we speak mostly in major metropolitan cities. And so as I get up and start to introduce myself, I'll ask people, anybody here in agriculture? No one really raises their hand. My next question is, anybody eat food today? And they all laugh and raise their hand. And then I'll ask, does anyone think that the food that you eat is connected to your health? Mm-hmm. And people stop laughing and get straight faced and start shaking their head, yes. Because we're at this state in America to where the way that we feed ourselves has had generational impact, not positively, on the health of Americans. And so the pursuit in America has been cheap calories, going back 30, 40, 50 years. And we're starting to see it today start to play out in our health.
We're going to take a deep dive on that. And it's something I'm concerned about.
Yep.
Kyle and I have talked about it.
Yep.
As you go around the state, are people concerned about it? I mean, are you seeing the interest, the urgency to try to address some of these issues?
Absolutely. Nature Dates, this honey company that I started, I put my cell phone number on the back of the bottle back in 1997 when I first got the honey company. And you would be surprised how many calls I got from 1997 to 2014. And over that 17-year period, the questions that they were asking then are still the same questions that people are asking now. People want to know where their food comes from, what's in it. Now, I think mothers are more concerned about it than fathers because most guys don't go out and, cook in general. But people start to see the correlation between our food and our health and realize that there's something that really needs to be done. And then we start to see the impact actually in agriculture, just in what's going on in agriculture in Texas. And all those things are connected. And so we have a declining agriculture infrastructure in America, and we're becoming more reliant upon other countries and even adversarial countries to be involved in how we feed ourselves. And so I think people start to see it, especially with the MAHA focus from Bobby Kennedy and President Trump.
You're an entrepreneur. We want to talk about that because, as I said earlier, the number one brand of honey, and you built it into that. And it's a great story. We're going to get to that. But you position that as being a healthy brand of honey. What did that do for you in terms of volume, getting shelf space, and having pricing power?
Yes, back prior to 2012, when I launched the Nature and Ace brand, the original brand that I acquired was called North Dallas Honey. So I bought a beehive as a hobby back in 1997.
Distinctive name, North Dallas Honey.
And so this Fred, who had started this little honey company, he had 100 beehives. He had 50 behind down at Brookhaven College, down on 635, and he had 50 behind the Jag dealership up in Plano. And so Patty and I had just gotten married.
That was the problem with your Jag.
Yeah.
Yes, the bees. Yeah, so Patty and I got married in 96. After we got married, she said we needed a hobby together. And back then they were actually promoting what the internet was for with TV commercials. I had this lady in a bee suit covered up with bees and said, you can find anything on the internet. I'd always loved honey. I was like, okay. So I went over and typed in Beekeeping Dallas in my computer and that pulled North Dallas Honey. So I called this guy and asked him if I could buy a beehive. And so after I hung up, I realized we live in an apartment. So I called my parents. I said, hey, can I put a beehive in your backyard? And so I started with this one hive. But on the weekends, I'd go and help Fred, work his bees. And
So you had some knowledge of beekeeping?
No.
Okay.
None.
Cool.
None. I bought a book called A Day in the Life of a Beekeeper, so like 365 days out of the year. And so I was reading that book. But I'd go and work the bees with Fred on the weekend. And, when what you work with can sting you really badly, you really pay attention. You're asking lots of questions. And so I would work the bees on the weekend. And then after a little while, he was in about 10 local health food stores. So I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because he had cancer and didn't know it at the time. He was 78. So I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go put honey on the shelf for him. And then Patty was a school teacher. She taught down in Stonewall Jackson, down in Dallas. And we started going down to his house at night and bottling honey by hand in his garage after she got off school. I remember one night she was like, what are we doing? I'm like, I don't know. We're just helping this guy. And so we did that for about a year. And then in the summer of 97, he said, hey, why don't you buy the honey company? I was like, buy the honey company? Why would I want to do that? And so I asked him how much he wanted. He said $10,000. I said, well, I'm $10,000. He goes, I'll finance it. So I was like, okay. So I was talking to my dad. My dad said, son, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. But I did it in 97. And so I hired a beekeeper up in Paris, Texas to bottle honey because I didn't buy the bee side of the business. I just bought the product side. And so I had a beekeeper that was bottling honey, and I had a small distributor that was putting honey on the shelf. And later in that fall, I wound up going to work full-time for a Christian ministry after going on a mission trip earlier that year to Venezuela and spent 12 years in full-time Christian ministry and always had the honey company just kind of on the side.
Wow.
And so I never got into it with the plans of getting into the honey business. I just bought a beehive, but I didn't plan on going in ministry. I just went on a mission trip.
I want to pause you on the honey. Take us to the mission trip.
Yeah.
What happened there? What happened in Venezuela?
Yeah. So we were at Prestonwood Baptist Church and someone said, hey, you should take this class called Evangelism Explosion that teaches you how to go and tell people about Jesus. And you actually go out and you do door-to-door evangelism. And so I, about halfway through that course, I was in the advertising agency business. I had started a small agency and I was sitting in one of my advertising clients' office and he said, hey, let's go to lunch. So we get in the car. He never asked me to lunch. And he was about 65 and literally chain smoke. Every other word was the F-bomb. And he goes, your religion's a real asset to your company. And I was like, okay. So I'm halfway through this class and you've got an outline that you memorize. And so I start to go through my outline. Jim, if you died today, would you go to heaven? No. Okay. Well, if you did die and you stood before God and God said, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? He goes, I wouldn't go to heaven. So I'm like, oh, okay. And so I go through this whole gospel presentation. I'm sure I just butcher it and come to the end. I look at him. I go, Jim, you wouldn't want to ask Jesus in your heart, would you? He said, yeah. And so I was so blown away. I mean, I was in my mid-20s and here's this guy, 65, accepting Christ. And so I committed to be a trainer about 6 months later. And then I would go out with my team. And I started thinking Sunday night, we were going to knock on doors tonight, and I'm the guy front and center. And I started getting a little freaked out. And so I met the guy and girl on my team, and I said, let's just get to know each other. It's the first night. We'll go out next Sunday. Came in that stress and freaking out again the next Sunday. And I said, let's role play tonight. And I'll never forget the guy goes, I thought we were supposed to do evangelism. I was like, bro, we'll get there. Lay off me. Yeah. So literally on the next morning, I'm in my office. I've got my Bible open and I'm just crying out to the Lord. I'm like, God, you got to help me get over this fear about doing this door-to-door evangelism. It was louder than audible. Go on a mission trip. And Patty and I had gotten married. We supported 2 people on staff with this ministry. It's now called E3. At the time, it was called Global Missions Fellowship. And so I had read that this guy was going to Colombia in 2 weeks. So I got up off my knees, called him, and he said that his trip was canceled, but this guy named Mike Downey was going to Venezuela on Friday. This Monday. I don't have passport, shots, money, nothing. But 4 days later, I'm outside of Caracas, Venezuela, doing what?
Door to door.
Knocking on doors, doing door-to-door evangelism. So I was so blown away. I saw like 35 people accept Christ that week and came back and started volunteering. And so this is the summer of 97. So I'm helping Fred in volunteering on the honey side, and I'm volunteering with E3 on the ministry side. And so I buy the honey company September 11th of 1997. At the end of September, Mike Downey asked me to come on staff at E3. And I said, you guys have to raise support like missionaries, right? And he's like, yeah, I'll pray about that. And so Patty and I started to pray about it. It took about, 6 weeks. And finally, we were like, all right, let's do it. And so we laid off a few people that we had, raised support, and went into full-time Christian ministry, which honestly, I look back on it, it's just the most amazing time in our lives. Watching God's supernatural provision of financially. We had little kids, and then my best friends today. I mean, I could go down a list of friends that we probably have mutually, like Chuck Wilson, who unfortunately went and died. But so many of those guys that I met in ministry, there were titans of business, land developers and real estate guys and oil and gas guys, and are some of my best friends today. And so that was a incredible blessing. But we did things like we created this one thing called an EvangeCube. Looks like a little Rubik's Cube. It's got 7 pictures that have the story of death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And so we created that in 2000 and started training evangelical networks all around the world. Like in India, my brother and I went over there right after 9/11 and went over in partnership with Crusade, trained thousands of pastors. And then in 2008, we created I Am Second with Norm Miller. And so we launched that out. And then in 2010, I left and started doing the honey company full time.
What year were you in Venezuela?
1997. Yeah.
Okay. So a different world.
Totally different world. And interesting.
So what do you think about Venezuela today in the news? Autocratic, not kind to Christians, not kind to a lot of folks for that matter. You were there. You saw it. You saw a chance to visit with the people. What's your reactions to everything that we've seen over the last couple of years, even the last couple of weeks in Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually in Venezuela 10 years almost to the day in 2007, and it was dramatically different at that point. And so I think about today. I mean, Venezuela is amazing.
So you had Chavez at that time.
It's an amazing country. I mean, the people are remarkable. There's so many unique aspects. Like there was a large contingency of Germans after World War II that went into Venezuela up in the mountains, and it looks like you're in some parts of Austria. There's blonde hair, blue-eyed people, and in these beautiful kind of European villages. So the diversity of Venezuela is amazing. And so I'd love to see, what's going on. And I think that the churches continue to survive, and it's the blood of the martyrs is that drives the growth of the church, whether we see it in the Middle East or Venezuela or other countries where Christians are persecuted. Fastest growing church in the world is both in Eastern Asia, in China.
You're credited with the I Am Second campaign of developing that. Where did that come about? What did you try to hope to accomplish, and what have you accomplished?
Well, I hope God's accredited with it. And so I will tell you the story of Norm Miller really is the greatest part of the whole thing. So Norm had been one of the largest donors at E3 for a long time. And
Norm's Interstate Batteries.
Yes, from Interstate Battery, yeah. And so we had started a small advertising agency inside of E3. I met a guy. I was teaching a Sunday school class at Prestonwood, and this young guy was a brilliant advertising guy. He actually worked for Publicis. He was the art director on the BMW account, and he wanted to come on staff with us at E3, but he couldn't. He had a hard time raising support. So I went to one of our board members, Craig Walker. He's a land developer here in Dallas, and Craig was telling me he was developing the harbor out at Possum Kingdom, and he had this ad agency that he was paying $30,000 a month to do the advertising. And I said, well, we'll do it for $20,000. So he goes, okay. So we wind up getting Adam to come on staff with us at E3. We had this little agency in-house. And so we did two of the guys that we worked with who were just amazing video movie production guys. It's DeTore Mayo, Sam DeTore and Scott Mayo. And they had been the producers of the Wandering Golfer TV show. And then they left there and they started their own production company. And their very first TV show that they did, called Tiger at 30, about Tiger Woods turning 30 years old. They interviewed all living presidents, all like the top sports people in the world. And they were nominated for a best sports show for an Emmy, their very first project together. And so and the cool part was, and I'll divert a little bit because I think it's really relevant. So Sam was the son-in-law of my neighbor across the street. And Rick, his father-in-law, would try to get me to spend time with Sam and share the gospel with him. And Sam grew up Catholic, wasn't really interested in, and wanted to go to LA and be a director. So he winds up getting hired at the Golf Channel to help produce this TV show and meets Scott. And Scott Mayo, an on-fire believer, and starts sharing Jesus with Sam. And Sam winds up coming to Christ, and then they leave and go start their own business. And so when Adam and I were doing this project for Craig Walker, we thought, well, let's do the Wandering Developer. So kind of a HGTV, morning show, but kind of the same theme that they did the Wandering Golfer with. And so we did that, and we were in the midst of doing this, project. So the four of us were doing that. And I get a call from Norm Miller because I kind of pitched him on letting us do some interstate battery advertising. I'm like, hey, that'd be a great customer. And he called me, he said, Nathan's just turned 70 years old. And I'll tell you, I was just sitting in my backyard and I was having time with the Lord, had my Bible open. And I'm just asking the Lord, what do you want me to do? I've got maybe 15, 20 years left. How do you want me to make an impact? And he said, he just felt like God said to him, have you ever gone for broke in your own Jerusalem? He's like, huh. So he's sitting there thinking about that. And so he's telling me this, like he's going through his thought process. And he goes, if I was going to sell more batteries, I'd probably do an advertising campaign. And if I was going to do an advertising campaign, then I'd probably use somebody famous like Tony Romo, lives in Dallas. And as soon as he said that, God just dropped this billboard in my head. And I said, okay, Norm, imagine you're driving down the tollway and you see a billboard. It's got Dirk Nowitzki on it. Dirk's the man. He's number one. And I said, but this actually says, I am second. Drives you to a website called imsecond.com, and we share the gospel using Dirk's testimony, and then we hook you up in a local church. And he says, let's get together next week and look at that. And I'm like, all right, great. Hang up. Adam's sitting like where you are, Kyle. And Adam goes, dude, that's huge. And he walks out of the room, comes back with a white piece of paper and a black magic marker and writes, I am second, which is the logo today. Yeah. And we go and take Lenny Kravitz and Bono and do this whole kind of subway advertising campaign, New York's campaign, and go over and present it to Norm. And he says, all right, I'll give you $3 million. And we're like, okay. And so that was in February of 2008. And so we went and called Scott and Sam because we had just done this TV show with them for Craig Walker's. And the four of us got together and, I want to credit, the three of them for really coming up with the visual style, the black shirt and the white chair and the light in the face. And then just to watch how God started to bring people early on. So one of the very first ones was Stephen Baldwin. And so Stephen had been talking to Norm about doing some business stuff. And so Norm introduced me to Stephen. So I brought him. And so on the way from the airport to the E3 office to shoot, he called Josh Hamilton from the Rangers. Yeah. And he's like, Josh, you need to do this I Am Second video. And then Norm was also talking to Brian Head Welch from Korn, because he had just come to Christ and he wanted to do a book or something. And so then Brian Head Welch came to our offices to do his I Am Second video. And if you're going to go watch one I Am Second video, that's the one to go watch. Wow. And he showed up in this black wife beater t-shirt with his hair in braids with white rubber bands going all the way down. And visually you're like, because the dude's all tatted up. And then Scott and Sam did the video of him, which really set the course. It was the North Star for just the avant-garde, just totally raw side. And so it was a total God thing. And so we, all that year of 2008, we shot videos and we just kept networking. It was always like 6 degrees of separation, trying to get to the who do you know? And so we were launching December 2nd, 2008, and we bought 20 or 30 billboards around Dallas. But we wanted it to all come out at the very same time. But, they do those in advance. So we draped them with black drapes, and so you couldn't see what was on it. And so that night before December 2nd, we went and pulled all those curtains down and launched out. And so because that's back in 2008, we had Google Analytics so we could see where people watch it, around the world. And within 3 months, we'd had like 180 countries around the world, people watching videos. And the only place we ever did advertising was in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, we've got the entrepreneurial piece, we've got the number one honey brand, but you really weren't the farmer on that. You were more distributor, put it on the shelves, et cetera.
On the honey?
On the honey?
Yeah. So,
on the honey. Ministry, advertising.
Got everything.
Those sorts of things. Where in the world does running statewide for agriculture, Commissioner, fall into this thing?
I left the day after I got out of high school and went to the Navy to pay for college because my dad's like, boys are on their own, girls get free rides. So I went to the Navy, and he was a colonel in the Air Force. And so we were raised
mostly in?
I was reserves, but I grew up on Air Force bases. Every 18 months we would move. And so kind of just grew up with that mindset of, serving.
And you did a lot of service in Austin, the Navy.
And so
I didn't know there was an ocean near Austin.
It was not like
I got to check the map on this now. Navy, Austin.
Camp Mabry. So, I had a desire to serve there, went into ministry, wanted to make an impact with the skills that God had given me. One of my life verses is Ephesians 2:10 that says that God created us as his workmanship in Christ Jesus for good works that he established beforehand that we should walk in them. And so our life is about discovering, why God gives us the time and the treasure and the talents not to use upon ourselves. And so one of the best things for me was to go spend 10, 12 years in full-time ministry and get to run with very successful business guys and to see their desire to make an impact for eternity with the things that they had been entrusted with. So when I left E3 and I started doing the honey company full-time, I wanted to make an impact for God's kingdom. And matter of fact, one of the very first things I did when I put my cell phone number on the back, I also put a Bible verse on the front. Thy word is sweeter than honey, Psalms 119, 103, which again was another North Star, impact because it helped really define what the future brand was going to be about. And so when I started doing Nature Nates full time, I wanted to inspire people to try to live a biblical way. And so the way we did that, we had our character traits called the Beatitudes that we inspired people to live inside of Nature Nates. Be loving. I mean, how many character traits in companies have be loving as the first one? Be loving, be kind, be generous, be faithful, be creative, be passionate. And we have scripture verses, behind those. And then every one of the facilities, we had a Beatitude box with cards. And if I saw Tom living out a beatitude, I would say, okay, so Tom do this, and I would put it in there. And then every quarter we would have 2 beatitude winners. We'd have a group that would review them every quarter. And then you would get a $200 Amazon card. But so did I, because I didn't want people just to try to live it when people were watching them. I wanted the real value was for people to learn how to see the good in other people. Because that's how you start to impact families as they bring it home and start to teach their kids. And so I paid better than anybody else. I paid 100% of health insurance. I mean, if I was going to bring my faith into Nature Nates, I needed to make sure that I was just doing things that honored the Lord. And so I was the CEO of Nature Nates until September of 24. I sold to private equity at the end of 21, just had gotten too big. I lost $4 million in 2017 because I built a second manufacturing plant in Georgia, and Costco wanted a price reduction. And so wound up selling private equity. And so when I stepped away, they wanted to put more distance between Nate Sheets and Nature Nates, the brand. And they said, just be on the board and we'll promote the other guy's CFO. And so I was in D.C. We had gone up there for the inauguration for Donald Trump. And Patty and I had gone back up for National Prayer Breakfast, and I was having lunch with buddy Rick Santorum. And we were just at lunch.
Former senator from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, ran for president. And so we were just talking about phases of life, full-time ministry, full-time Nature Nates, want to make an impact for God's kingdom inside of Nature Nates. And now I'm like, where can I make my impact next? And so, a hammer always sees a nail, and the answer is a hammer. So Rick's like, well, what about politics? And started talking about, if you really wanted to make an impact in Texas, the power is not being the governor or something like that. It's these other offices. And he says, with your experience and background, what you did at Nature Nates with testing honey, building a brand, creating raw and unfiltered, and you go look at how we're losing agriculture and people are getting sick, you should go back and go run for ag commissioner. I was like, well, I appreciate your input. So I came back and was telling Patty, my wife, and we were talking about that. And she said, well, what does the ag commissioner do? And I said, I'm not really sure. I said, I've been one of his largest donors over the years, but I don't really know what he does. And so I pulled up his job description, and I was shocked. You're over feeding 5.5 million kids in Texas in the school lunch program. Yeah. You're over consumer protection. You're over pesticide use and application in agriculture. You're over rural health, economic development, and broadband expansion. There are so many things that could be done. It's a huge organization. But the things that I had saw in the job description and the things that I had observed on social media over the years did not match up at all. And so I called our current commissioner, took him out to lunch and said, are you going to run again? He'd been in there for 3 terms. And what are your plans? He said, well, I'm thinking about running for the Senate for John Cornyn's seat. And I said, I think that's a great idea. And I'd like to run for ag commissioner, and kind of laid it out. And he said, you should run. Now, if he were here, he'd go, well, I meant you should run if I don't run. That was in March. And so I started praying about it. And, in May, or as I started praying about it, talking to people, the more encouragement, especially from young moms. They were like, please, please, please go work on cleaning up the food. And so we filed in April, and then we had a launch party out at Nature Nates Farms up in McKinney in May. And so we jumped out there. Never really thought I'd be in politics, never felt like I needed to be in politics. But the reason why I'm doing it is because I want to make an impact in people's lives. I want to make an impact for the kingdom. I want to see if I can impact the trajectory of Americans' health. My own mom had breast cancer and Alzheimer's, died of Alzheimer's. Neither one of those were in our family. And she always said that she thought she got that from the chemicals that she used in gardening, which she did a lot of. And we just continue. I mean, we've just become a country of chronic disease.
So started out with a friendly lunch with Rick, and then a friendly lunch with the current ag commissioner, which is an incumbent. The campaign's turned into pretty much of a brawl since then, however. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
What's the commissioner and what's the state doing wrong today in agriculture?
And I think about being the ag commissioner. It's not going to be about me. I got that out of my system when I had my face on millions and millions of honey bottles on the shelf. And so I don't need to be the center of everything. And so I want to create a environment where the center of it is farmers and ranchers and the health of Texas families. And we are a focus and a service of excellence and service orientation. I think too many times in government that bureaucrats view people there to serve them versus the bureaucrats are there to serve people.
So the department today is not serving the rural farmer?
No. We lost.
Why? How?
We lost 68 farms this week in Texas.
Right.
And last week, and the week before, back 2018. And the reason is because farmers can't afford to be in business. I was just down in Beaumont a few days ago with a rice farmer, and he told me that he went and sold his crop for $9 per hundredweight. So $9 for 100 pounds of rice, not wheat, rice. And he says, but it cost me $13 to make it. So that is the state of agriculture. It doesn't matter whether it's cotton, cattle, or corn. Your input costs have gone up 300%, and your revenue has come down 60%.
Okay, so, but let's play that out for a second. So 100 pounds, $9, that's what the manufacturer, the producer got. When I go buy that at the store—
33 cents an ounce under Tex Modi. So between the 9 cents an ounce that producer was paid and the 33 cents that's on the shelf, it's margin on top of margin on top of margin.
You got a quarter.
And because it's all about distribution and warehousing and how you go to market. If I sold a bottle for $2 of honey, it'd be at the consumer for $7. So what's that $5 in between those two? And so there's a move right now in America neededly to lower cost of living, to lower food prices at the shelf. Yet
known as affordability.
The competing issue is we're losing farming and ranching, and we've got to raise revenue and profitability. So those things are completely at odds with each other. So how do you take that $5, start to move more of the $5 towards the producer,
Sure. Yeah.
lower the price to the consumer, and you start to connect the producer to the consumer to the producer more.
And how do you do it?
What do you do?
Yeah. So it's all about marketing and distribution. So we've got the Go Texas program in Texas. It's actually a program that was created, I think Rick Perry might have done it. And it was created to help farmers and ranchers be able to sell products to consumers.
And you want to take Go Texas to Grow Texas, correct?
Correct. Because you go on there right now and it looks like a kids fundraising project in elementary. It's got scented candles and bracelets and healing crystal earrings and things that have nothing to do with agriculture. I was a member of Go Texan back in the 90s. It didn't provide any benefit for me, and it doesn't today. And so we're going to take that. We're going to go into retail. We're going to create a robust direct-to-consumer opportunity through retailers. And then we're going to have a digital version. And if you don't live near a retailer, then you can go sell direct online. Does that translate to soybeans and, cotton? No. But it's the first step in trying to start to bridge that gap between producers.
You mentioned losing 68 farms to Texas. You can play that game all across the nation. Part of the challenge on the pricing is you've got consolidation. It's a lot easier to, on a dollar-by-dollar basis, farm 1,000 acres than it is 100, those
Sure.
sorts of things. So you got consolidation. You've got major corporations that have now gone into that. I guess, is there a future for the small farmer? And if so, what do you do to hold that small farmer up, but still get the economies of scale to get the cost down, as you just talked about, when it gets finally to the consumer?
Yeah, so last year in America, we lost 122,000 farms. And you know what size farms they were? Not small. They're actually the medium-sized farms. They're people that are trying to do it full-time, because small farmers, they've got full-time jobs. They're doing multiple things.
It's on the side.
But it's the
More
guys,
hobby type of thing.
yeah, it's the guys that are trying to scale up and really try to make a difference. And so that's the challenge that we have. And so when I think about,
and what's a medium-sized farm? A couple 100 acres?
Yeah, 250 and up.
Okay.
And I think it's 50 cattle or more. But let's think about how we feed ourselves. So in 1970, we had 700 meat processing plants in Texas. Back then, a rancher could make 70 cents of $1 of food share. The packers made 30 cents. Today, there are 4 major packers in America that control 85% of the meat market. They make 70 cents, and the producers make 30 cents. It flip-flopped it. Why? Because a producer has no other alternative. Just exactly what you just said. The consolidation that's happened because of private equity and BlackRock and just natural consolidation over time has taken optionality off the table for most producers. You used to have hundreds of seed companies that you could buy seed from. Now you have a few. You used to have hundreds of grain buyers. Now you have a couple. You used to have hundreds of equipment companies. Now you have a couple. And so,
is it an antitrust question?
Right now the Trump administration's investigating the meat packing. We have 4 meat packers. 2 of them are actually owned by Brazilian companies. They're not even U.S. companies. And so you're relegated to selling to just a few people. And farmers and ranchers are not price makers. They're price takers. You take it or leave it. It's not like you can go shelve your cow for another year or go put your crop up and just wait till you can sell it at a better time. And so they're relegated to just take whatever price is offered to them. So when I sit with President Trump, I want to have a conversation with him to look at how we feed ourselves in America through the same lens that he looks at NVIDIA chips and the national security issue that he sees having one plant next to China and says, we've got to bring that back to America. Mm-hmm. But he's doing that across all of the spectrum of manufacturing because we lost all of that in the 70s and 80s with the most favored nation with China.
And Nate, we've increased imports during this period of time.
We're more reliant upon our adversaries to feed us than ever before.
Yeah. But then why is President Trump turning around and trying, especially on the Argentinian beef, trying to increase the imports of Argentinian beef?
because he's trying to temporarily lower the price pressures for consumers. That's an easy short-term fix there's issues with Argentinian beef versus Australian beef because of hoof and mouth and things like that. But the point is, he is trying to get beef in. We've got the New World screwworm, which is a fly that lays an egg and the larva burrows in, screws into a living host and eats the living flesh. So we have shut the border of Mexico because it's south of us. And because of that, we're not importing cattle into America. So we've got the lowest cattle herd in 70 years. We've got the highest beef prices ever, and we can't have enough throughput.
And we've gone up beaf prices 30% in the last
I think
months.
it's $8 right now, and they're predicting it'll be $10 for ground beef. And so there's always short, medium, long term, and that goal with Argentine is just trying to do a short term.
So you're ag commissioner. What are you going to do about it?
Well, the bully pulpit. Our current commissioner doesn't talk about these things. He is now, because I'm talking about them. But previously, he's not going out from a businessman's perspective and looking at
why
the
it
issues.
seems like a big
Because he has
issue.
no idea what to do. He's a tree grower, and a pot grower. And so, to go out and try to figure out, okay, what is the challenges today? Part of the challenge in all sectors of agriculture, we used to have a textile mill in Lubbock, Texas, where 40% of the world's cotton is grown. There are 2 textile mills in America now on the East Coast. We're losing our cotton gins. We're losing our dairies. We're losing, our grain silos. The aging infrastructure, they just closed a rice facility down in Houston. The aging infrastructure is so old and outdated, and it costs a lot of money to invest back into it. I mean, think about can we go back to 700 meat packing plants? We don't need 700 meat packing plants, but how could we create a network of 50 or 100 across Texas? But it always comes back to, well, how are you going to finance it?
So what are these levers that you pull? Let's say you become the ag commissioner, and let's say you've got your first 90 days in office. What are the first, call it 3 levers you're pulling?
I'll give you 4 levers. Here's the first 4 things. I call it the 4 Ps: people, process, profit, and product. So people, we're going to go in and we're going to re-interview everybody that works there. And we're going to find out what SID holdovers we got and get rid of them. We're going to create an environment. It's a cancerous, gross environment where people record each other right now. It's just, so I'm a big culture guy. I'm a big team guy. We're going to build that back up quickly. And we're not going to start when we get into office. We're going to start working on this March 4th. Then secondly, process. We are going to deregulate where we can deregulate. We're going to go look at all the regulations and say, does that help a farmer be in business? Or is it about consumer safety? And if it's not one of those 2 things, we're going to figure out how to get rid of it. Fees were raised by $26 million on farmers and producers to pay for his TV show and other just crazy things that have nothing to do with producers, but everything to do with
travel
him.
thrown in there too, right?
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Right now he says he's going to 48 countries doing trade missions. Like, what are the KPIs associated with knowing if that's a success or not? And so we're going to lower fees. We're going to make it easier to be in business and agriculture in Texas than before. The third thing is the profit, taking the Go Texan, the Grown Texan, and really working on that. And then the fourth is product. The children are our future. And so we're going to go in and we're going to take that 5.5 million kids that we feed in the school lunch program, that we're 44th out of 50 in the nation of nutritional value for school lunches. Maybe that's why we're 41st in education. Those kids perform to how we feed them.
But it sounds like there's a paradox there, Nate, in the sense that if you look at those 4 Ps, one of them is the regulation, and take the regulation out, get the government out of it, reducing that sort of thing. But when we were talking just a moment ago, it almost sounds like government's got to be the role in going in and saying, we're going to have more than 4 meat processors. We're going to change the delivery systems and pull the middlemen out and those sorts of things. If government's got to do that, how do you balance that with get the government out of the process?
Yeah. And again, I think that the government has a role in making sure that we bring the right people to the table, that we don't pick winners and losers in business, but we create the environment to say, this is what we need to accomplish. We need the private sector to come in and come up with the solutions, and we're there to support you. But there's the goal. And we see it, the ag commissioner and Donald Trump, 2 totally different places. But to be able to go and talk with him about and help him see the dangers of not having meat processing or other food processing facilities, and we're very concerned about China bringing fentanyl in up from Mexico, which I totally agree with. But we rely upon them for 60% of the raw materials for our pharmaceutical drugs. They're involved in the way we feed ourselves. Everybody wants to stop China from having access to our lands, but we give them total access to our grocery store shelves. So we just need to, really bring these things to the forefront and start to figure out. I don't know what I feel about public partnerships, but I always think that, private companies are the solution.
Yeah, and a lot of that I like, but when you pull off the Chinese brands off the shelf, doesn't that increase the cost? In other words, you take it away, less competition, and it makes that affordability thing that you talked about a little bit earlier, and everybody's talking about, a little more difficult to achieve.
Well, and let's take the meat packing, for example. If we just have meat packers that are driven about pure margin, then all we've done is went from, 4 slave owners to maybe 50 slave owners. And so we need to be able to lower the cost of meat processing. The reason why it was 30 cents in 1970 is because there were 700. It was commoditized. And so to think about creating infrastructure that operates in that same commoditization mindset, whether they're done through co-ops or whether they're B Corps, there's about $60 billion in people's donor advised funds, and you can actually use those dollars and invest them into for-profit deals. And most people who do that are trying to invest in companies that make an impact in communities and societies. And so approaching that, or maybe even do an IPO of a B Corp and let the Texans own the meat infrastructure with the mindset of the goal is to not make this the most profitable contributor to your 401k, but it's to secure the food and the way we feed ourselves for the future.
Well, and how long do you think this takes? I mean, is this a 5-year plan? Is this a 10-year vision? What is it?
Yeah, it's probably a 10-year vision. And so maybe I get the ball rolling and I don't, I told the Farm Bureau, listen, if I'm not a good ag commissioner, I'll help you find the next guy to run in my place. And so, but I'm, again, I never intended to be in the bee business. I've never intended to be a minister. I went on a mission trip. And so I'm just going to get in there and rely upon the Lord. And I do love Deuteronomy 28, which is a verse that when George Washington was sworn in as the first president of the United States, placed his hand on the Bible, opened Deuteronomy 28 that says, if you seek after me and keep my commandments, hear all the blessings of heaven. And they're all agricultural blessings. I'll send the sun and the rain. Your crops will be abundant. Your animals will have lots of babies. Your enemies will be at peace with you. And so I think that that's the model. And George Washington was saying, I don't know how to be president, but I do know that we can trust this. And so that's how I'll lead and that's how I'll serve and just rely upon the Lord to give us the ideas like we did in ministry when he gave us I Am Second and Evangel Cube and the idea for Nature Nates and others.
The meat processing is an interesting bridge to another topic because not only have we seen the consolidation there, you mentioned the 4. Mm-hmm. If you look at the labor force that is now in those meat processing, it has been alleged with appears to be some facts that nearly that entire workforce is illegal immigrants, undocumented, illegal, whatever word you want to use. Talk about that as an issue and how we deal with agriculture and the need for labor in an environment when we're pushing back against immigration or open immigration.
Yeah, it's another, here's another issue where they work against each other. I agree with everything we've done. I was down at the border in McAllen last week, and I was doing a selfie video speaking to President Trump, and I said, you said you were going to shut down this border, and man, did you ever. And I turned around. There was not a single person down near that border. It was amazing. So check, first one. Second one, get dangerous people off the street. I don't care if they're illegal aliens or legal Americans. If we have dangerous people that are predatory, that are raping and
I think
stealing,
everybody agrees with that.
Yeah.
And clearly we went way too far in the past administration.
Yeah.
So everybody agrees with that.
But now we have this next level of people, that are the whole DACA, the people who have been here for decades who pay taxes and own companies and that's a challenge. And I think they're really starting to work on it and address it. I read an article the other day that they were looking at a program that's not considered amnesty, but really trying to deal with the labor issue because the labor
administration,
issue,
administration is Homeland, et cetera. Okay.
So there's a major issue, and especially agriculture labor. You know, we've got the H-2A program, which we in the honey business, you know, we use a lot of H-2A workers, but it's expensive. I mean, by the time you bring them in, you pay them, you house them, everything that's required, it's the equivalency of like $40 an hour. So that's just not sustainable. And so we need to figure out the labor challenges associated. I talked to a sheriff up in Dalhart. You know, the Texas legislature passed a law that local law enforcement would work with ICE and go out and do the enforcement. And this guy was telling me that he went in and he's arrested 78 bad guys, like illegal felons. But all the other people, you know, who weren't felons, illegal, they all disappeared. And these dairies are going out of business because they don't have workers.
Yeah.
So
is that happening in the meat processing too?
I don't know. You know, I've not got up
because it appears the administration has not gone after.
Right.
Well, they're going after the meat packing. That's just currently out of you know, collusion, price fixing, antitrust.
Yeah, but not on the labor.
But not on the labor. It doesn't appear that they have had raids that have focused on those areas. Even though, as I said earlier.
Well, listen, Cargill just shut down
general knowledge
1,800 people out of Amarillo on a shift. You know, so the issue is about how do they actually have enough throughput to keep people there working, you know? And so they've got, you know, bigger issues, you know, today as it relates to their businesses.
Will Americans take those jobs?
I think it'd be amazing. But how do we get people who live in Chicago to go pick oranges down in South Texas, you know? And so in Texas, I talked to the executive director at FFA, Future Farmers of America, and they teach kids about agriculture, but she said, we really don't direct kids to go into agriculture because it's not a viable industry to go be in, especially if you're not a fourth or fifth generation. If you're not a multi-generation farmer or rancher, you're not getting into agriculture. And so they teach them speech and debate and kind of get them ready for college or going to work. So if we can start to turn the ship on the financial model of inside of agriculture, I think, and if we start to integrate things like gardens in the schools and we teach kids about food and how it's made, you know, it is a longer, going back to your, you know, 5-10 year outlook. It takes years and hopefully not decades, but a period of time that we start to make agriculture a viable option. And we see it like beekeeping. When I started it, beekeeping wasn't cool, you know, but after I launched Nature Nates in 2010 and created the raw and unfiltered sector of honey, you know, at the time, honey in that point was at $300 million at retail across the United States and had been flat for decades. When I launched raw and unfiltered in 2012, it was still $300 million. Today, it's $1.5 billion. Because what we did is we went and studied, when do people eat honey? Well, it was primarily breakfast. And so we wanted to drive consumption strategies. So we talked about breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacking, grilling, baking, you know, bar drinks, and just consumption. You go on the YouTube page filled with all these fun recipes that we were driving people to. And what came out of that is all of a sudden bees were super important. Everybody was interested. And now there are thousands more, tens of thousands of more hobby beekeepers because we started to bring attention to the commodity that had been flat for decades, had been around for ages since creation. And it became in vogue because you started seeing Revolver Blood and Honey, you know, the beer, which they made from our honey, or, you know, or all these other products, which became the standard and people got interest in it. And so going back to your question about labor, you know, as we start to bring attention to it, and we're seeing it now with Bobby Kennedy and Brooke Rollins, and, you know, it's something that we can really make people want to be a part of, but it's financially broken today and they can't be.
We keep coming back to this paradox. I think most Americans would say that I would like to have more small farmers. I would like to see more domestic production, and not only production, but the processing, as you've pointed out. At the same time, when he or she goes to the supermarket to buy groceries for their children, they want to see those prices come down. That's paradoxical. How much can technology help us in this realm?
You know, I would love to go sit with Elon Musk, candidly, and talk to him about the needs of labor, the needs of better equipment in agriculture. Optimus bots are coming out. They're going to be $20,000, and probably it's a SaaS model, paying $100 a month or whatever it is. And if you could have an army of Optimus bots, and they can realistically go and pick oranges or plant, and that could be a massive input. And we don't know what the real impact of AI is going to be, especially as we hit general intelligence at some point here relatively soon. And the impact of those could have it become more of an agrarian society out of need more so than interest, as we have, potential, we all talk about it, potential massive unemployment related to AI. And so, it's really hard to know what the future entails.
I'll take the opposite question. Look away from technology. Do we have enough water to handle the agriculture in the state of Texas? And would you look into something like cloud seeding in a company like Rainmaker, as which I know is controversial here in the state of Texas, but would you look at something like that as a way to help solve a potential water issue?
Cloud seeding wasn't controversial before Kerrville. I'm sure it was to a certain extent, but that's what really brought the focus. But as I think about the soil in agriculture, we've lost much of the organic matter that's in our soil because of the way we have farmed with tillage. And you're breaking up the dirt. You're getting the topsoil is being blown away, from wind, or it's being washed away with water. And the result is that we have much denser, dirt, and cannot maintain absorbing water when it rains. And so we get these, both from concrete and really hard dirt, we're getting more flash flooding. And so, the cloud seeding is something that is utilized in areas where they really need to do it. Going back to Deuteronomy 28, I think the better solution is to seek God and keep his commandments. And he said he'll send the sun and the rain. And so just trying to find, the balance of that. But the dirt is the big issue, because if we don't have organic matter in the soil, I think I saw a statistic the other day, for every 1% of organic matter, it's the equivalency of 1.8 million acre feet of water being able to be held. And so at that point, your reservoir is the dirt, because it's holding moisture more so than it is now. And so, as we look at this, we have to look at it in totality of how do we slow water down? How do we get it absorbed into the ground? But then also look at things like produced water, coming out of the Permian Basin, where we have 6 million barrels of oil and gas every day. We have 26 million barrels of produced water. And so Senator Charles Perry, who's the chairman of the Ag Senate Committee, is working on a project with technology to clean that up, to be able to make it potable and utilize in agriculture. And I think they're 6 years into that. And then we've got desalination, where we take, brackish or saline and clean it up. A lot of that's done in the Middle East today. But water is a big issue. Up on north, they're concerned about property rights and Marvin Nichols Reservoir, and eminent domaining people's land. Over in East Texas, people are worried about accessing groundwater and kind of limiting people's property rights, because businessmen go in there and buy up land and start to access that water and start to sell it off, and people's wells are going dry.
Boone Pickens used to do that.
Yeah, West Texas, we got the Permian Basin. Then you go to South Texas, and we got Mexico not honoring the treaty and not providing the 350 million acres feet a year of water. And then the river is filled with feces and excrement from Mexico. And so you're not even getting good water as it is.
So Nate, how big of an issue is the water? We're going from 25, 30 million to 50 million. People use a lot of water. The administration's clearly pushing for additional oil and gas resources to be domestic. That takes water, as you pointed out, from a fracking standpoint. Then you've got the agricultural piece, especially if you want to bring, as you've talked about, some of the farms back and those sorts of things. Is there enough water to accomplish all three of those things?
There's going to have to be, and we're going to have to figure out how we do it. I mean, because now you layered on data centers on top of that, you know, which are closed,
you're right.
closed loop systems, you know, and so it's not like they've looped it in like up on the Tennessee River. But even in a closed loop system, I've heard varying levels of how many gallons it's going to take to charge them, you know, and fill them initially. But I also see that as an opportunity that if we have companies like Google or, you know, other technology companies coming in and they want to build data centers here because that's accessible for where the power generation is, which is the real driver, then great, help be a solution on the water side and financially participate to create these technologies.
There's discussion today on the food front, an awful lot of it, that we look at. You know, we were talking 40, 50 years ago, the obesity rate for young people was single digit, less than 9%. Today, the latest numbers I've seen, a young person has a 40% chance of having diabetes too. All food related, that sort of thing. Ultra processed, sugar in drinks, those sorts of things. What's your view of that, and where do you want to go with it?
So 78% of kids 18 to 25 cannot serve in the military because of their health. We're spending $1 trillion.
Most of that, I assume, is obesity.
Yeah. So we're spending $1 trillion to revamp our military. I hope we're doing automated drones because we might have trouble manning it into the future. You know, and so when you start to think about the what's happened, I mean, it really started going back to when we started the Industrial Revolution. People started coming off the farm, coming into cities, and how do you feed people in cities? And then it had to be about preservatives and distribution and canning. And that's when we started to do all these things, which now we look back on, it looks so archaic, but it was required because people no longer lived on the farms. And so
it was a way to really leverage off of and create more food supply.
Yeah, that had a longer shelf life. Yeah. And so now it's been about convenience. You know, we're busy as Americans. You got soccer and school and dance and recital and blah. And so moms just needed to be able to eat on the go. And the large food companies in America were trying to provide the cheapest calories possible. Are those healthy calories? No, not necessarily. They were just calories, you know, to make sure you're filled up. And, you know, chips, you can fill up on chips, not really good for you. And so I think the what makes me very excited is to see the new food pyramid that's been turned upside down.
And you're a supporter of Secretary Kennedy?
Absolutely. And Brooke Rollins. I think they're both brilliant. You know, Brooke Rollins is a great Texas gal. But I like to look at that food pyramid, and everything that's on there are things that come off the farm and the ranch. And I like to just say this is the golden age of agriculture for us going into this. And we need to, again, go back to how do we start to connect the consumer to the producer and really allow people to know who their farmers and ranchers are and how you can buy local and support local. And, you know, if we can do that, you've cut out all the distribution costs associated with it. So it can become more affordable for a consumer because they can charge less. The producers prices, again, they're takers, so that price is fixed. But they can start to be a maker if they get to sell direct to a consumer, and it would be cheaper than if someone was buying it through a typical distribution platform.
Given that, then, I think about the smoking debate of a couple of decades ago. We recognized finally that it was detrimental to personal health.
Oh, it's not healthy for us?
We also realized that it was detrimental to the societal economics, that we were paying for a lot of those medical costs, et cetera. So it wasn't just the personal decisions, it was the societal costs that went along with it. And we not only, in a lot of cases, outlawed it, we had label disclosures, hazardous to your health, et cetera, those sorts of things. So I think about all those sorts of things, and then I think of, you know, the 32-ounce sugar drink. We can put names next to it, but we'll just leave it at that for a second. How is that any different than smoking? Because we know it creates obesity. We know that creates death, maybe not the death certificate is going to say it, but it will say kidney failure. It will say loss of limb. It's a lot of different reasons for it, but it all goes back to that. We're paying a big cost in that. It is more expensive to take care of someone that has diabetes too, and all the associated issues that come with that. Why don't we label that stuff, and why don't we finally go at those producers, much like we did the cigarette manufacturers, say, hey, folks, we're not going to do this anymore.
Well, thinking about cigarettes, I mean, we had RJR Reynolds, which was one of the big cigarette companies. And after they were busted, they figured out, well, that recipe can be transferred over to other industries, and now it's RJR Nabisco. And so in the big food world, and having spent 30 years in it, large food companies are not good at innovating and creating new brands, new products. It's much cheaper for them to go find small and up-and-coming brands that became successful because they had healthier ingredient decks and they had better for you processes, and they were mindful about the creation of those products. Well, big food comes in and buys those brands, and they can put them into their distribution pipeline and goes from being in 5,000 stores to 100,000 stores overnight. And so now you've got the revenue going, and you see, is there consumer acceptance? Is there sustainability? And once you see that, then you go into a value engineering process to go and look at ingredients and go find cheaper ingredients versus maybe that clean deck that the original company had done, or cheaper processes. And value engineering is all about driving profit creation. And so big food is always struggling, trying to figure out. I remember when Kraft did, I think, a $14 billion write-off, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago because of all the brands that were just antiquated, like Jell-O and things that, at one point were great. Now they're not. So it's, and when money gets involved, it's always important to remember.
That's the private
any
side.
company is about shareholder value creation.
It is, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it difficult on the private side. And it's the reason we have government regulation to say in a capitalist society, we want to have capital opportunities, but we also have to define a box. We don't allow antitrust, et cetera, those sorts of things. We have inherently made the discussion involve these sorts of things through the smoking that. Secretary Kennedy, when he was on the private side, was a great advocate of going after ultra-processed food.
Absolutely.
And I really commended him for that. In his confirmation hearings, he talked a lot about we're going to go after ultra-processed foods. We're a year in now, and while he's talked about vaccines and made some changes in those areas and that, ultra-processed foods, the manufacturers of them or the producers of, high fructose, sugar-oriented drinks, they seem like they've gotten a free ride. Why is that?
Whether it's in agriculture or whether it's in food, there's incrementalism, which is important, because if I'm a food manufacturer, I've got inventory that I've purchased. I've got distribution where I have product on the shelf. I've got packaging that I've, printed 3 years worth of packaging. And so there's a lot of costs associated with bringing products to the shelf. You can't overnight flip a switch, because Walmart is not going to just pull that product off the shelf, put on new product, and not have it at a cost to that manufacturer. And so even on the timing of that, switching from one SKU, which is your barcode, to another, you've got to sell that product off the shelf. Then you've got to have that distribution warehousing to where you have the old product taken out, you have the new product brought in there, then you have to reset that shelf, and that takes time to go do it. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But then even more upstream from the retail side is you wind up having the manufacturing to where people are buying ingredients, and they've got 5 years worth of contracts with companies that are their suppliers, and they've got to fulfill those contracts. And so there is a transitionary time that I'm sure the big food's thinking, if we drag our feet enough, or if we go file lawsuits enough,
they can just wait in
we
court.
can wait out for the next administration.
Yeah.
Which is the challenge of 4-year administrations, and everything changes on a dime, which we saw this last cycle, from bad to good. So
are there any tactical things that they should be doing that you don't think they are doing today to continue pushing this down the road?
It's easy to be
businesses or the government.
The government.
It's easy to be an armchair quarterback. I'm not, Bobby Kennedy and Brooke Rollins are not really calling me and asking my opinion.
But potentially,
they might be.
in a year they are going to be.
You got it.
And I will be an advocate of that, and also.
You have been. Your honey was based on a healthy view of the product.
Yeah, it was a better for you. It was a better for you version of any honey out there, to where now the testing methodology is the norm, that all the growth is associated to raw and unfiltered, and now honey is the primary sweetener. Household penetration went from the low 30s to it's almost in 60s now in America, where countries like Australia, where I own Nature Nates, it's in the upper 90s, and so Americans just have to demand. I mean, we vote with our dollars. Mm-hmm. And I did a teletown hall the other night with 50,000 people across Texas, and people were talking about, why do we have oranges, or why do we have tomatoes that are coming from Canada, or why do we have blueberries that are coming in from Guatemala? Because that's what you want as consumers.
Yeah.
You want blueberries 365 days a year. You want oranges 365 days a year.
Right.
But listen, people, they don't grow 365 days a year. Yeah. And so, but grocery stores are going to stock what people buy.
What's fascinating to me, though, and Nicole and I have talked about this in the past too, if you go to Europe, the food that you eat is inherently, even the breads. Yeah. So take something, the breads, which can really be a issue here in the United States, bleach flour, et cetera, those sorts of things. In Europe, you don't have that. So people with gluten, they go over there, usually don't have an issue.
Yeah.
The bread, the way it's treated, the grain itself is not separated. So it's the whole grain, which even here, when we say whole grains, we really don't get whole grains, those sorts of things. That shows that we can do it, right?
I have not spent time studying the European agriculture economy and whether it's thriving or in decline. I agree with you that everybody who goes over to Europe, including myself, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. But they also have very strict, like, no GMO. Like I could buy honey from Europe, but as a producer, I was not allowed to sell honey in Europe. I could buy honey from Mexico, but I couldn't sell honey in Mexico. One, they have protectionary trade practices, but they also have health standards and regulations, specifically GMOs and chemicals. And the companies that sell so much of that into America are actually based in Europe, which is insanity.
Yeah, that is.
And so
that's another topic, but maybe for for the administration's trade policies.
Yeah. So it's again, looking at the totality of how we do it, I do look forward to going and really studying what is really going on in Europe. Is there agriculture in decline like it is in America, or is it thriving? Mm-hmm. Are they more profitable? I think those, trying to go and study any time where someone is doing well, it's worth the time, effort, and investment to go see what's done differently and what can we adopt.
You're truly an individual that's dedicated his life to service. You did that in the Navy. You did it in the ministry work. I might argue that what you did even with Nature's Nate was a service component, healthy, et cetera, those sorts of things. Now you're running for public office, which clearly is an important part of public service.
In the same heart.
With the same heart. What do you want your legacy to be?
That I walked in faithfulness with the Lord, and that I lived in a way it says that we're the aroma of Christ and we smell like life to the living and death to the dying. And, living in a way that makes people want to know, why do you do that? And so that could be in the office in Austin if I wind up at TDA, with people that I work with, or it could be, with people that we encounter. So I just want to be faithful and then live in a way that inspires my kids and friends, as they inspire me, I want to inspire them. And, it's the iron sharpens iron, and living in community with other people. And because, you're great one week and you're down the next week. And so when I'm down, I need you guys to help me get up. And when you're down, I'll help you get up. And I think that's the important part in life, and trying to maintain that we're here to make an impact for eternity. And that means doing things tactically today, but am I doing them in a way?
This life is just the start.
Yeah.
Am I doing them in a way that really realizes this is all temporary, and are we making an impact for eternity?
A good friend of mine, Jim Dennison, often says, you don't need a church for a ministry. You're a good example. Nate, thanks for being with us.
Man, thank you,
We
guys.
appreciate
This
it.
is an honor.
Good seeing you,
That's
sir.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching today's episode. Again, today's episode is sponsored by Clay Cooley Automotive, a family-owned, family-operated automotive company serving the local DFW Metroplex for over 22 years.